Hello, Professor. Hello, class. My name is Evan, and this is my verbal communication brief for Module 4. Today I'll be talking about the speeches of New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu and President John F. Kennedy's speech at Rice University, or known as his Moon speech. So what I'm going to talk about mainly is how two messages with very similar purposes came out so differently because of the audience and the message that they were delivering. So first I'm going to talk about Mitch Landrieu's speech, and then second I'm going to talk about JFK's speech, and then I'm going to go back and talk about both of them at the same time and how the similar effects were used with different emphasis to deliver their speeches. So first, Mayor Landrieu delivered a speech with a very assertive tone, but also a very supportive tone, because he needed to deliver a speech to the audience of mainly the people in the room, but also to all of New Orleans about his message, which was that the Confederate statues in the city of New Orleans were kind of a taint on the city, and he needed to educate them. And that was really the purpose of the speech, was to educate and to bring everyone in New Orleans onto the same page, which is very interesting because he did a very good job of this because of his supportive tone and how he really encouraged, with the way he spoke, listening and understanding from his constituents. Interestingly, John F. Kennedy's purpose was very similar. He also was trying to educate his audience. However, his audience was, the people of the United States, and specifically the people who were at Rice University when he gave the speech. His message was, we need to go to the moon, and this is why. Contrary to the Landrieu speech that was very supportive, John F. Kennedy's speech was very direct. And this was really because, he's the president and he was delivering a message as a president who is convinced of what he's doing, and he's explaining to everyone why we need to do that. It's not a contentious topic. It was really, this is the way forward, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And that made it very interesting that although their purposes were both education, their deliveries came out very differently. So now looking between the two speeches, you saw very similar mechanisms used to deliver these speeches and deliver these messages. Each of them talked about history, each of them talked about the future, and then each of them connected to the audience in their own way. So starting with Mitch Landrieu's speech, he really used history to, show the negatives of history and talk about what negatives really affected and are continued on by the presence of these statues. Alternatively, John F. Kennedy's speech about history really talked about, the glories of exploration, the glories of technological discovery, of scientific discovery, and why going to the moon meant that in the future, when we achieve landing on the moon, when we achieve, space, winning the space race, that is a great achievement for Americans, just as scientific discoveries in the past have been great achievements for man. Landrieu's use of the future was very different because it wasn't a great achievement. It was really righting the wrongs of the past by removing these statues. And not even so much as righting the wrongs, but, restructuring to understand that there were wrongs in the past and that this is the way forward for the future. And then the third thing that they both did was connect to their audience. And I found this really interesting because of how differently their connections were and how they wouldn't really have worked in the other speaker's shoes. So Mayor Landrieu, one part of Mayor Landrieu's speech that spoke to me was when he tried to have everyone relate to trying to teach a fifth grader about why there's a statue of Robert E. Lee in New Orleans. And everyone can kind of relate to trying to teach a fifth grader a difficult subject. It would be very difficult. And it's very much more of a somber tone. John F. Kennedy, on the other hand, used humor and a little bit of comedic relief to stimulate his audience. When he was talking about the difficulty of going to the moon, he asked, why does Rice play Texas? Great question at Rice University, because Rice playing Texas in football would have been a great challenge. But they do it because it's hard, and they do it because winning or succeeding in going to the moon is a great achievement to be glorified. Now, the interesting thing is that although their purposes were so similar, they were delivered so differently, and it was very important that were delivered differently. JFK's comedy or humor would not have been accepted or, taken well in Marilyn Drew's speech, and Marilyn Drew's somber tone wouldn't have been received well by the American public, who really kind of needed to be, amped up and stimulated by the JFK speech. I found it interesting that the writing was very different because in Mitchell Andrews' speech, it felt very much like his spoken word. But while reading the John F. Kennedy speech, it felt a lot more like he was bragging because you don't really associate yourself as much with the written word. But when he spoke in the verbal communication, you really connected with that as an American who got to share in the accomplishments he was talking about, which I found very interesting. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing your comments.